Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today we're going somewhere, well, a bit quieter. And honestly, much more honest than the usual conversations we have about intelligence. We're tuning into that quiet, often suppressed conversation happening constantly inside the heads of some of the most highly intelligent people around you. And they almost never let this conversation out. Not because they don't have the words, but because of a pretty fascinating psychological pattern. So get ready, because we're about to unpack the hyper-awareness trap.
To really get a grip on this, we've got to look right past the typical habits, the impressive achievements, or those common struggles you've probably heard about a million times. That brings us to the absolute core of our explainer today. What do highly intelligent people genuinely think, deep down, but literally almost never say out loud? We're going to uncover the hidden psychological reality of what it actually feels like to process the world, well, just differently than most people around you.
Now, I want you to consider this unspoken thought. And this isn't just some random passing musing. No, it's a powerful window into the daily internal friction that high IQ individuals are actively suppressing. See, somewhere along the line, exceptional minds learn that certain thoughts, they're simply better kept to themselves. The cost of actually sharing these thoughts is so often misunderstood, and that leads to a life of really quiet containment.
So here's exactly how we're going to break this all down today. First up, the silent inner conversation. Then, the persistent awareness gap, followed by missing the quiet switch. After that, we'll move into the visibility paradox, and finally, bridging the silent gap.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the silent conversation, the inner versus social world.
So, decades of research in cognitive psychology have pointed right to this exact issue. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi actually spent his entire career studying exceptional minds, and he found something super interesting. He found that intelligent people often experience this profound internal tension. It's like they hold these incredibly rich, complex mental landscapes, right? But trying to translate that landscape into an everyday conversation, it often feels almost impossible. The crucial takeaway here is that their silence isn't a lack of words, and it's definitely not an inability to express themselves. Nope, it's a highly learned behavior. It's totally designed to help them navigate a world that doesn't quite match their own internal pace.
Moving right along to Section 2, the persistent awareness gap, seeing 3 steps ahead.
Okay, so the awareness gap is basically this constant, low-level buzz, this sense that the way you're perceiving a situation is just fundamentally different from how everybody else is seeing it. And I want to be absolutely clear about this. It is not necessarily about seeing things better. It's just different. It's more layered. It's a lot more connected. When your brain is out there naturally connecting dots that others haven't even reached yet, well, it creates a very specific, kind of unique social friction. And honestly, this unspoken thought brilliantly illustrates that exact friction. I can see exactly where this is going, and I don't know how to explain it without sounding arrogant. Think about that. This is a thought they almost never say out loud, yet this one little thought completely silences countless conversations before they even have a chance to happen. Imagine walking into a meeting and boom, immediately seeing the outcome 3 steps ahead of everyone else. There is simply no socially smooth, easy way to just announce that, right? So high IQ individuals, they often just choose silence, because the social cost of speaking up feels way higher than the cost of just keeping their mouth shut.
Which actually leads us to a fascinating contrast, often summed up by another one of those unspoken thoughts. I'm not bored, I'm just waiting. Now, from the outside looking in, a highly intelligent person might appear completely disengaged, maybe distracted, or just totally checked out. People naturally assume, oh, they're bored. But the neurological reality, it's entirely different. Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex reasoning and planning, is actively humming and processing in the background. Even when they look completely still, they are not absent. They are somewhere else entirely, on purpose. And since that inner processing is totally invisible, they've just learned to let people assume whatever they're going to assume.
Which brings us to Section 3, missing the quiet switch, the hyper-connected brain.
Let's just pause for a second here. Have you ever been in a room where you felt like you were watching things from a slightly different angle than everyone else? Like the conversation everybody was having wasn't really the one that actually needed to happen? Well, if that feeling is even remotely familiar to you, you might kind of understand the baseline reality of a high IQ mind. They carry that intense feeling of misalignment almost 24/7.
Let's quickly break down the actual neuroscience behind why that happens. Studies suggest that highly intelligent brains literally, physically operate differently. First, they show greater neural connectivity. Second, that means way more regions of the brain are firing together, way more often. And third, while this intense pattern recognition is absolutely a tremendous cognitive gift, it means the brain cannot easily just go quiet. Intelligence at this extreme level simply doesn't come installed with an off switch.
And that leads right to this incredibly honest, totally unspoken thought. I wish I could turn it off sometimes. Being this aware is just exhausting. Now, they're not going to say this in polite company. It's not meant to be some dramatic complaint. It's honestly just a quiet, everyday truth. The constant processing, the never-ending pattern recognition, it leads to this invisible, unique kind of exhaustion that most people would never even begin to understand. And because it doesn't really translate well over, say, small talk, it stays a heavily guarded secret.
All right, let's dive into Section 4, the visibility paradox, the lonely intellect.
So, research in social psychology points directly to something called the visibility paradox. Basically, this happens when an individual is highly visible for one specific trait, so in this case, their intellect, right? But as a result, they end up feeling entirely invisible as a whole complex human being. High IQ individuals are so frequently viewed through this incredibly narrow lens. They're slapped with the label of the smart one, the analytical one, the person everyone immediately runs to for all the answers. And look, while being valued for your big brain definitely has its perks, it creates this genuinely heartbreaking unspoken thought. I'm not sure anyone actually sees me clearly. See, being known for your mind does not mean you're known for your doubts, or your fears, or your deep human need for genuine connection. For these high IQ individuals, being constantly relied upon for their intellect quietly reinforces the feeling that the rest of who they are just doesn't even register with people. They rarely say this out loud, because voicing it, well, that requires vulnerability. And for someone who's expected to literally always have the answers, vulnerability was never really the safe option.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Bridging the Silent Gap, Redefining Intelligence.
So what's the big takeaway from this explainer? Well, it's that intelligence, at its absolute deepest level, is actually an emotional and social experience. Those unspoken thoughts we've been talking about. I can see where this is going. I wish I could turn it off. I don't think anyone truly sees me. These are absolutely not signs of arrogance or some desire to disconnect. Not at all. They are simply signs of a mind that's working on a frequency most social environments just aren't tuned to receive. And honestly, perhaps the most important realization here is that we all have a gap between what we're thinking and what we actually feel safe to express. It exists in absolutely everyone, just to different degrees. Which leaves us with this final, really vital thought. Understanding that gap in others and, in yourself is one of the quieter but much more meaningful forms of human intelligence. So take a look at the highly analytical, hyper-aware people in your own life. Knowing what you know now about the exhaustion, the silence, and that tough visibility paradox, who are you failing to see clearly?